The Passion of New Eve by Angela Carter. This was an assigned reading for experimental fiction. And in this video, I will be talking about the summary and the context and the characters, and also give you a full analysis of the different concepts explored in this book. The Passion of New Eve is written by post-feminist writer Angela Carter. The context of this book is 1977, the backdrop of second wave feminism. The second wave of feminism is usually demarcated from 1960s to late 1980s. It was a reaction to women returning to their roles as housewives and mothers after the end of Second World War. During that time, women were fired from these positions and replaced by men because men had returned from the war. A large percentage of women were left jobless, and women were expected to quietly resume their duties as housewives and mothers and do all these household chores. And this really propelled the women to revolt against this. And so the second wave of feminism is a struggle for both public and private injustice. And women were publicly talking about these issues of rape and asking for reproductive rights, and they were aware about domestic violence, and they wanted workplace safety. And so women were just asking for the rights to make decisions about their own body, like whether they wanted abortion, whether they wanted to plan their pregnancies, whether they want to give birth or not. And that's something that is only sole property of a woman, to take care of her own body and use it as she wants. And so at this time, a lot of other revolutions were also happening, and that is in the Black movement and also the queer movement at that time. And it is a satirical novel. It talks about power and gender and sexual identity. There's so many thematic elements that are explored in this book that it is a manuscript of so many ideas that you can derive out of it, and it's very complex to study as well.
The Passion of New Eve can be studied as an experimental fiction. It has the different features and characteristics of the postmodern beliefs and discourses. The first one is intertextuality, blending of genres, or you might even call it a bricolage. This book has different genres such as fantasy, magical realism, science fiction, dystopian fiction, and speculative fiction. It delves further into the study of trying to answer what if. So what if this were to happen, and what would be the results of that? And a lot of various questions that come up in our mind when studying about body, gender, and sexuality, but those which are not fully expressed in the real world. And that gives us space in a fictional world where you can have no boundaries, there's no blurring of the line, and everything can be explored and speculated and studied to see what the essence of this subject matter can accumulate to. Next is rewriting narratives, dismantling the canon. So if we see these great narratives that are out there, they do not focus on the small specified narratives of people that live all over the world, that experience different forms of gender, that are not the heterosexual people, and those who are different ethnic groups, or they are from different races. And these small narratives that are equally as important as the grand narrative that is set by the WASP canons of the Western society. And while this is all being deconstructed, the narratives that are already prevalent in the society can be reconstructed and rewritten with a space for everybody to be more included in the storylines, and their experiences, their impressions of the world can be explored. Writerly text, and that is being open for interpretation. So if it's a readerly text, it is closed, and there is no interpretation or meanings that you can apply on your own. But as a writerly text, this book really opens up the vast space for somebody to apply multiple discourses and engage with the moving play of signifiers to construct endless cycles of meaning. So there is no single sign that it equals to the signified, but now we have a chain of signifiers, and you never get to the root of the meaning because there is such an interrelation with so many aspects of whatever we try to study. No closer, open-endedness. And this book itself denies having any closer. It tries to make us think about our own ending of the book, like however we want to interpret it and how we want to see it. It's just open for discussion. And this is a very important quality of an experimental fiction that does not try to confine you into a certain box where you think like the majority of the people. Shock effect, intellectual engagement. Now, an experimental fiction like The Passion of New Eve is set out to engage the reader on an intellectual, philosophical level. It wants to provoke people to consider ideas and concepts that they've never thought about, and to utilize this newfound knowledge and to move forward from there and have a new experience of exploring these ideas. And then this also helps the readers to suspend their autopilot expectations and discover new ways of seeing. And it's being actively engaged in the text to derive meanings and to apply it in the life. And experimental fiction and its effect on the reader really helps a person to be more insightful, self-aware, and more accomplished when talking about these hidden narratives, talking about these concepts that are buried and that are seen as taboo, and there are always discriminated in our society. The summary of Passion of New Eve. The novel begins with Evelyn, the protagonist, a male character who is in England. He's at the movie theater and is watching Tristessa perform as Catherine Earnshaw in the movie Wuthering Heights. He makes a decision to go to New York because he's been invited to work as a professor. So he travels to New York and he sees that everything is up in the flames. It's very chaotic in New York. It's not normal. There are rats running around the city, there's darkness, there's just fires, and everything is going crazy there. It's insane. There are political activists running around. There are groups who are trying to invade the city and trying to have an uprising of asking for their rights and freedom and justice. So you've got feminist groups who are trying to have a movement on their own, and then they've got these black groups who are also trying to have a movement, and at the same time there's queer groups. So everything is so dismantled in the city. It's very desolated, and Evelyn, his first hope of becoming a professor in the university, is cut off very shortly because black militant groups they invade the university, and he does not have any work to do anymore. And then he's very alone, and just to survive he makes a friend, Barislav, who is from Czech Republic, and he's an alchemist. But unfortunately, Barislav is killed by the people in the city. And after that, Evelyn, as he's wandering off in the streets of Harlem, he notices Layla. And she's an African American dancer at the club. So he follows her, and soon they have a relationship. He's living with her and she's earning the money for them. She's giving him a shelter. But Evelyn is a very misogynistic man. So he treats Layla very badly. He abuses her emotionally and physically, and she feels like she's a captive when she's living with him. Then it happens that Layla becomes pregnant. And at the same time, he has a call from his parents saying that one of his relatives has left a big sum of money in his name, and he can go and claim that. So he tells Layla to go to a voodoo abortionist and get it done. So she goes there and something goes wrong and she has to be hospitalized, and the medical bill is really high. And even though Evelyn has the money to pay off the bills, he does not do that. He sends her a little bit of the amount, and then he sends her flowers, and then he tries to escape from that place because he's just running away from his responsibility as a father, as a partner of his woman. And while he's out in the desert in his rented car, driving and feeling that this new wilderness, this desert, is a piece of heaven for him because it's his escape, it's his pathway to becoming more independent and living his own life the way he wants it. But everything goes wrong right there because even though desert signifies this landscape where you don't have any responsibilities, where you can just get lost and rebuild your own future or anything like that, he gets captured by Sophia, who is a female worker of the goddess, the mother. And the mother is a black goddess from the city of Beulah, which is an underground city in the desert. So this community is very matriarchal. They have all female workers, and the goddess performs a kind of surgery to people to turn men into women. And so Evelyn has to go through that transformation. He gets raped by the goddess, and they collect his sperm and they keep it in reserve. And the goddess has this idea that she wants to impregnate Evelyn with his own sperm after she turns Evelyn into a woman. So she performs surgery on him, and his body of the man is all his genitals are removed and replaced by female genitals, and he has a functioning ovary, uterus, and the female parts, everything artificially constructed and implanted on his body, but it functions as normal. And so while they plan to impregnate him with his own sperm, after that, Evelyn, who is now transformed from Evelyn to Eve, that's his new identity as a female, he finds a way to escape the city of Beulah. And while he's on his escapade right there in the desert, he's captured again. And now this time he's captured by this wives of Zero the poet. And Zero the poet is a patriarchal man running a patriarchal community where he treats his wives as slaves. And he takes all the women to be his wives. And he has 7 wives as of that time. So as soon as Eve is taken to Zero's house, Zero rapes her, and he plans to make her his 8th wife. And the other wives, the 7 wives, they're very jealous of Eve because they all share one night with Zero, and they get one turn in a week. And then now there were 7 of them, and they had 0 every night for themselves. And now they had to share it with Eve. And somebody had to compromise by becoming a half-wife. But Zero is a very attracted by Eve, because Eve is this embodiment of this beauty that all males want. She's got everything. She's got the body that is very attractive. And Zero takes her as his main wife, also because she's the most eldest among all of the wives. The youngest wife that he has is barely 12, or not even that. Like, it's not mentioned in the book, but she's very young. And so all of these wives are very young. They're just in their 20s to almost 12 or below that. The peculiar part of this community is this masochistic and also sadist way that Zero behaves with his wives. And there is a kind of a pattern that they always follow to get cultured. And it's just really interesting that these wives don't have the sense that they are being brainwashed and they've been dominated by Zero. So as Eve is part of the harem, now he sees that what the wives do is, as soon as they wake up in the morning, after Zero wakes up, they go and kiss his feet, and they start the day. They work around the farmhouse. They're raising cattle, and they've got pigs, goats, dog, chickens, a lot of different animals, and they've got the garden going, and the vegetables and fruits and everything they're growing by themselves. So they've got plenty of work to do during the day. They clean the house, and they live separately from Zero's house because Zero has this whole big house for himself, and his pigs are allowed to roam everywhere, to go to the kitchen, to go to the bedroom, to go everywhere. But wives, they're very limited in their space, so they just have one room and all the wives sleep together, except the wife that is going to be with Zero that night. And so these wives who are being treated poorly, not even as good as the pigs in the house, because pigs just get to roam everywhere, they get to go everywhere, they get to eat good food. But these wives, they're never given meat, they're always given very bad food, and they don't even have proper utensils to eat out of. They don't have proper clothes. They are living this horrible life, and Eve is just horrified. He does not know what to think of it, and he himself is a tabula rasa. So he's a blank slate. He's seeing everything from a new perspective. He's no longer the man that he used to be because he's been castrated. And now in a female's body, he feels like an outsider looking in. But he can feel everything. And the one of the most eye-opening part is when Zero rapes Eve. Eve thinks in her head or in his head that he now understands that only when he himself is being violated, he understands that he was a violator before he was transformed into Eve. He was a violator as well. He's now experiencing all these things happening on him, and he's changed. His perspectives have changed, and he realizes what kind of man he was. That his misogynistic nature is perhaps also reflected on Zero. And while living with Zero with a very bad experience, Eve Eve also finds out that Zero hates Tristessa. In the past, Eve, when he was Evelyn, Tristessa was his fantasy, a woman fantasy, that he loved her, he loved her beauty, and how she always acted so well in the movies, that she was this subservient woman, this mellow woman, demure, a perfect man's wife, a perfect female in a man's eyes, and also had this incredible beauty in her. And Zero totally hates Tristessa because Zero has this notion that Tristessa performed a magic on him and it made him infertile, so he's not able to give birth to children, even though he has so many wives. So he wants to kill Tristessa, and he believes that once he kills Tristessa, he will be able to become fertile and he'll have a lot of children, and he's going to repopulate the earth. And after several months of trying to find out where Tristessa lives, he finally learns of her location in the desert. So at this point, Eve has been with Zero for 3 months as his wife, and now the whole group of women, the wives and Eve plus Zero, they travel out into the desert to the glass castle of Tristessa. And it was very hard to look at Tristessa because Tristessa has already been retired from a profession. She's no longer an actress, and she's just living a solitary life in her glass castle. And she just wanted to be out of the eyes of the public. She just wanted a private space. And now Zero finds it out, and everybody, they just get inside her castle, her mansion, and they start looking around for Tristessa, and they see a lot of wax figure in one room, and those wax figures are of Hollywood actors, and different people. Then there are some wax figures inside coffins as well. They find this elevated part in the room where there's a coffin as a central piece. And when they look inside, they see that Tristessa is lying down in the coffin. And they think that she must have died. But Zero's dog sniffs her out and finds out that she's alive. So they suddenly know she's alive. And while Zero is trying to strike her, she gets up, Tristessa, and then Zero strips her with the help of his wives and sees that Tristessa is actually a man, and none of them knew about that. And Zero always had this idea that Tristessa is a dyke, and that's why he hated her. And dyke means lesbian, but he had no idea that Tristessa would actually is actually a naturally young man. So they see his genitals as a man, but his appearance and everything, like with the makeup and everything, it's just like a female's. And Zero attempts to have Tristessa and Eve marry, so they conduct a wedding ceremony right there, forcibly, and then they force them to have an intercourse right there as well. And then Tristessa and Eve, they become kind of empathetic towards each other, and they plan to escape. So while Zero and his wives are just wandering about in the glass mansion, they escape. Eve and Tristessa go out while Tristessa presses a button, and then the mansion starts spinning and it crumbles down, and Zero also dies in the process, and all the wives and Zero, they just crumble and die in the mansion. So now Tristessa and Eve walk through the desert, and they're just going around, and they fall in love with each other. It's a kind of very interesting relationship, because Eve, originally a man who has been transformed into a woman, plus Tristessa, who is originally a man and who has been living his life as a female. They have this sort of a relationship that is so difficult to explain or understand or really get to the bottom of it, because it's so different from what we experience in the real world. And while they're walking out in the desert, so it happens, even though they've fallen in love and they explore each other's fantasies, and they have this really loving relationship with themselves, they get met by a group of people in the desert who are just young boys, and they have they think that Eve is being mistreated by Tristessa, or she's being held hostage by him. So they kill Tristessa, they shoot him dead. And Eve is just shocked because she doesn't know what to think. Tristessa is her husband. She just tries to explain that to the boys, but they don't really feel any remorse about that. And she once again escapes from this group of boys. Then, while she's just walking on her own, she gets visited by Lilith, who is Layla. And upon this visit, Eve learns that Layla was just a manifestation of his corruption and lust and his misogynistic ideals. And Layla, who's now turned into Lilith, she's a militant leader, and she tells him that she'll bring him to the mother. And they have a conversation where Lilith says that Eve can now have his genitals back. But Eve, in her new body, going through such a long experience and different experiences, sensibilities. She thinks that she wants to remain as Eve and does not want the genitals of Evelyn. Now, she is brought to the mother, and we see this new image of mother where she is kind of retired. She's by the ocean. She's just very gray haired. She's old and she does not seem powerful anymore. She's lost all that vigor, the inertia, everything. And then Eve takes her boat and then tries to sail away from the land. And that's how the book ends.
Let's look at the characters of The Passion of New Eve. It is a first-person narration, and it is narrated by Evelyn, the main protagonist in the book. So we follow his story and his experiences to what happens to him from the beginning of the book to the very end. He is a British man, and he works as a professor, but he's very misogynistic. He sees women as objects, and objects that he can conquer, that he can use as per his desire, and abandon them when they don't interest him anymore. So he undergoes a forced sex change operation, and he's transformed from Evelyn to Eve. He also does not trust anybody, and he's always watching his back in the book. So he's a man who begins as Evelyn in a male's body, and then through from the 1/3 of the book to the whole entire section, he is Eve, transformed into having a female's body, but still retaining his consciousness as a male. The next character in the book is Layla. She's African American. She's very exotic. She's exuberant, has this beauty, has all these lavish clothes that she adorns herself with, and she works as a dancer at the club. And she's the daughter of the mother. The mother, the ruler of the city of Beulah. Later on, Layla becomes a military leader, and at that point, her name is also changed. She becomes Lilith. The mother is a central figure in this book. She's the monstrous black goddess of Beulah. Her appearance, having 4 nipples, which is having multiple breasts, and wearing a false beard, having giant limbs, and physical strength that can even terrify a male. So she's a scientist who makes extraordinary experiments, and one of her experiment happens to be Evelyn. She planned to inject him with his own sperm and then give birth to the Messiah, but which never happens because Evelyn runs away. And she's connected with the connotations of fertility, nourishment, and fear. The mother, the castrating mother, we try to pinpoint to Freud's notion of castration. The mother as a figure is something that is not built upon a male's fantasy. It's something that every male fears, and she's a very powerful character, and she embodies this matriarchal rule. She embodies having the idea of creating a world where only the females rule. So she's this archetypal character, a matriarchal ruler. The most interesting character in this book is Zero the poet. his narrative in the story is very ridiculous, and the way he carries out himself and the way his living condition is and the way he is as a person, his characteristics, is very humorous. So he has only one eye and he has only one leg, and he lives in a ranch house in the desert. He does not use human language to communicate with anybody. He uses it as less as he possibly can. Most of the time he is howling, he's grunting, he's squeaking, and he's barking to get his points across. And so he's a misogynist because he has 7 wives, but he does not treat any of them well. He treats them like slaves. The day begins with his wives kissing his solitary foot. They go on about the day, they finish their household activities, do all the work that is needed to be done on the farm, in the house, and go buy groceries and everything, and take care of the cattle, animals, because he's got pigs, he's got dog, he's got goats, chickens. And whenever his wives sit down to eat food, he stands with a bell in his hand. And as soon as they sit down to eat, he rings the bell, which means like he's telling them to go to work. And when Evelyn, as Eve, he's also part of the harem, and he's the 8th wife of Zero the poet. Eve sees it firsthand that before he's able to swallow the biscuit, the bell has rung and he has to get up and go work. And so the conditioning in the house is very dramatic and is also very terrible. So his 7 wives, they think that Zero's sperm is a magical fluid which will help them to retain their youth and extend their life. So it is a source of their strength, or as they believe, they've been conditioned to believe that it is that fluid which keeps them alive, and if they are deprived of it, then they're just going to waste away and die, and they're going to lose everything. So these wives, they really strive to outdo all the others. They try to compete among themselves for the share of Zero's attentions. And when Eve is brought in as the 8th wife, the wives become very jealous, and because they could have him at least one day per week as per their routine to be with him in the night, they've got to share it with Eve. And also Zero is trying to make them practice on having these disciplines of motherhood, and he does that by making his wives take the piglets and treat them as if they are human babies by wrapping them up in the blanket and feeding them from a bottle. And Zero thinks that this practice, this discipline, will help them in the future when he's able to give birth. He's infertile, and he thinks that Tristessa is the one who has performed a spiritual vasectomy on him and made him infertile while he was watching the movie. So he hates Tristessa, and he thinks she's a lesbian, a dyke, and he wants to find her and he wants to kill her. Tristessa, as a character in the book, who is an abstract concept in the beginning, but later she turns out is a very significant character as well. So she's a Hollywood actress who embodies the archetypal woman. So, women of a male's dream, a woman who has all the kind of qualities that patriarchal society wants in her. And she's retired and lives in a glass mansion. In the book, she turns out to be a transsexual, that she's not exactly a woman, but she is a woman, but in a man's body. So he met us man and wife. Although it was a double wedding, both were the bride, both the groom in this ceremony. Page 135. This quote is taken out after Zero and his harem discover and invade the castle of Tristessa. And here, man and wife refers to Tristessa and Eve. So they were forced to be wedded together because of Zero. And the next quote, "What if Tristessa made you pregnant?" she said. "Your baby will have 2 fathers and 2 mothers." So she, in this quote, is Lilith. And Lilith asks Eve, what if he's pregnant? And with these 2 quotes, we can see how it's not easy to comprehend when somebody has this androgynous body and is both male and female in one body, and is same factor with Eve and same with Tristessa. So they have both male and female parts in their body. So also in the psychologically and physically, they are androgynous, and this comprehension is very hard, but it's a unique perspective that we can gain from this book, and it's something that can probe our mind to think deeper, to think out of this 2 biological sex that we've always been told about and was always thought that was normal. This can really bring out this range of different identities and range of different explorations and concepts. When we're doing an analysis of The Passion of New Eve, there are 3 major concepts that we come across and that we can explore further in this book. So the very first one is debunking gender myths. Second, demythologizing heterosexual normativity. Third, fluidity of sexual identity. So with debunking gender myths, we're talking about the kind of myths that have been established from the very beginning of mankind. So if we look at all this religious text, especially the Bible itself, so we come across the book of Genesis, the beginning of the Bible, and there is already a prevalent myth about the masculinity and femininity and what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, and how the mankind itself was created by God. And this book is very on the concept of the Garden of Eden itself, the central myth where the creation of mankind is debunking gender myths. In this book, The Passion of New Eve, Angela Carter has this central mythical element that is driving the plot, that is driving the narrative, and that is the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden is present in biblical text, the Genesis, the first book of the Bible, and in the original narrative, God creates mankind. First, he creates Adam, a man, and then, taking a bone out of the rib of Adam, he creates Eve. And Eve falls into temptation, gets seduced by Satan, and her downfall begins, and she also drags Adam into it. And therefore, they're both disgraced and they fall into sin, and they get punished for that, and they have to live in suffering and chaos and misery for the rest of their lives. And there's a whole lot of consequences that come out of it. And then, so this original myth that is in the Bible is comparable to the myth that is also projected in the Passion of New Eve, and that is Evelyn being transformed into New Eve. So the goddess of Beulah, the mother, she creates a new being out of Evelyn, a man's body, and creates a female body, being a surgeon and using her scientific knowledge. And having this fully functioning body of New Eve, New Eve is just a beginning of how she's also going to fall into sin, or rather, she's already fallen into sin as Evelyn. So Evelyn was the sinner, and this trajectory, this transformation into New Eve, is a way for him to redeem or get some kind of atonement. But it's not an easy ride. He has to go through a lot, and there's a path of suffering, a path of learning, an education that comes at a great cost for him. And this brutality, this terror ahead will only try to shape his mind, his psyche, into knowing the sin that he has committed and how he was oblivious to that. And so the New Eve is on a path for atonement, and she tries to find her path away from the fall as when she was Evelyn. So the second one is passions, and the title itself, The Passion of New Eve, is evident that there are a lot of passions, types, manifestations of passions in this book. And the first one is passion as language. And when we're talking about passion as language, it has a connection with sign equals to signifier by signified by Ferdinand de Saussure. And this idea is subverted in this book. So language is not as simple as having two binaries, two opposites, where you have man and woman, and you have the sun and the moon, and light and darkness, where one side of the binaries elements are much more discriminated against. They are seen as lesser of the other side of the elements, which are more dominant in discourses, in text, in literary text. And so passion is language here. So you just can't pinpoint to what language can do in a scenario where we're talking about masculinity and femininity. And language can really drive a wedge between these two parts. So language is also satirically upheld in like Zero's notions that language being a driving factor where a person can be able to express their ideas and express their knowledge and maybe get a sense of their identity and figure out that they've been subjected to being a lesser person. And that's what we see in Zero's harem. So his wives are not allowed to use language. They have to grunt and howl and meow and use all these animal vocabs and not use the human language itself. Because language in itself is a power that somebody can have to express themselves and to learn about their situation. And keeping somebody in the blind would be taking away the use of language from them. And here, this is a kind of a chain of signifiers in this book, The Passion of New Eve. There are so many multiple interpretations that you can have on this text, and you just cannot get to one interpretation. There are a lot of things that could be signified, and so it just moves on, and it's all signifiers as such. And next is passion as suffering. So the metamorphosis of Evelyn into Eve, and a whole lot of experience that is before her is way of suffering. And she goes through the hands of the mother in Beulah, and then she goes through the suffering with Zero and in his captivity. So this suffering is actually very important, significant in the book, because there has to be somebody that goes through this same kind of suffering like the suffering that Christ went through in the Passion of Christ. So Eve's suffering is connotative to the suffering that she can take everything on herself and get rid of this people's notion of what gender and sex really means, and about this theories of body. And so she stands as this scapegoat almost to show the other people that how ridiculous all these debates on gender and theory is, and how ridiculous it is to see from a male's perspective on things that our women are going through. And the men in the society, they are not aware of all these experiences that women go through. And so Eve is a subject who will go through the suffering to shed a light on all of these ideas. And next, passion of being acted upon. Now this is much more about being passive, and we see how Evelyn, when he has a male's body, he's the one who's acting upon others. He's very he has the agency on himself. But as soon as he's transformed to Eve, all his agency is taken away. He is now passive, and he sees everything happen to himself, and he gets raped by the mother, the goddess, and he gets raped by Zero, and then he gets raped by Tristessa. So all these different versions of him being acted upon is something that is being explored in this book. And next is passion as an obsession. And this relates more towards Evelyn as being a subject, and then him looking at female counterparts as an object of desire. And he's obsessed with Tristessa from the very beginning of the book, because she shows these feminine qualities that is very rigid in a male's mind, where you see demure woman and a woman who is beautiful, who embodies everything that a male's fantasy can actually think about. And so this obsession of Tristessa as the perfect woman, and the obsession of him with Layla, which again turns into bitterness. And this is a lot of obsession that is explored in this book. And next, you have passion as erotic love. And this is a bit controversial. I think the part of the book that really focuses on erotic love is probably when Tristessa and Eve figure out that they're actually in love with each other, and they can build something that they've lost for all this time, and they can build something out of themselves, and they have a true love, which is very short-lived, unfortunately. Exploration of social creation of femininity that perverts the culture discourses related to cinema, psychoanalysis, mythology, and religion. So, in relation to Tristessa and her work at the cinema, where she projects herself as a female, so she's a female impersonator. Tristessa is a man, and how he projects himself in the cinema as a female is very convincing. It is the way that a man would perceive a woman, and whatever he thinks is the role of a female, he tries to imitate that in the screen. So that is one of the biggest reason why Tristessa was the male sexual fantasy of all the people who ever watched the movies. And he was a very famous star of Hollywood. And to keep up with the image of how he's the pristine, untouched woman, the desire of every man, he never went into scandals. And he was probably afraid of getting discovered about his true identity. So he kept away from everybody, and when he retired, he tried to go to a place where nobody would ever find him. And this female body that was embodied in the movies that he played in always depicted sorrowful, episodic versions of women. And she was also known as Lady of the Sorrow, because she projects all these feelings, emotions that men think women have, and puts it all out in the cinema, how he acts on it. And next, psychoanalysis. So there is a lot of psychological engendering of Eve as soon as Evelyn is transformed into Eve. So the women of Beulah, they try to give him lessons on how to perform as a woman and how to behave, and these lessons. And there's I'll go into more psychoanalytic reading in the next slide. So next is, of course, discourses on mythology. And all this mythology and religion and social creation of femininity, this is already a eye-opening factor that what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a feminine character with all these feminine qualities is just subjected by the society. It is a creation, and it is acted. It can be imitated, because we know that Tristessa was able to pull it off being a man, he was able to act like a woman, and it was very convincing, and everybody thought he was a woman. So being feminine, it seems that it can be acted and it can be imitated. So it's not something that is given to you at birth. It's not something that it's connected anything with your biological sex. So acting feminine, being feminine is just gendered to you by the society. Demythologizing heterosexual normativity. So at a glance, what this means is, from the very beginning, in different discourses and mindsets of people, we've been taught that a relationship between a man and a woman is normal, and anything beyond that is abnormal. All these experiences of queer people, the LGBT people, is something that is abnormal, and it should be avoided, and it should be ridiculed, and this type of concept has always been there, prevalent in our society. But in this book, Angela Carter is challenging us to think beyond that aspect, that heterosexual normativity, being normal, is probably something that we have been made to think, and maybe it's not real, maybe the truth lies somewhere else. So we'll see different gender theories and psychoanalytical theories, and we'll see um, how we can subvert this notion. And The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, 1949. It was a very important feminist text where Simone de Beauvoir claims that a woman is not born as a woman. A woman is made to be a woman by the society. A woman learns to be a woman. So this already tells us that sex and gender are two different things. So sex would refer to the biological components of your body, but gender, which is a social construct, is something that you acquire once you are born and you live in the society. And with this study of sex versus gender, we move into this second wave of feminism from the 1960s, which lasted until 1990s. And in this period, we have another text that came up, that is Cyborg Manifesto by Donna Haraway. And Donna Haraway her actualization of a cyborg, which is the figure of the cyborg, is half organism, half machine. And this reflects new post-gendered, post-humanist identity. So this half organism, which is a cyborg, is not something that we can classify whether it's male or a female. It's an androgynous body, and it's even beyond humanist, which is almost machine-like, it's robotic. And hundreds of years from now, I think people, they will evolve into this kind of cyborg, or at least they will create new species of people just like us, but which are created and who don't have the failing capacity like a human body, which has utmost power, strength, and durability, and does not ever get exhausted. And that type of being that type of cyborg um, is something that is beyond our reach right now, but is something that um, is expected to happen in the future, and it is something that it's so unimaginable, but very interesting to think about. And next, Judith Butler talks about gender performativity, 1988. Judith Butler's exploration into how gender is itself a performance, as we could see from Tristessa performing as a female movie star, and also Eve performing as the new Eve. And though he still has the psychology of a male. And so this is very derived from Simone de Beauvoir itself. And if we look at the psychoanalytical theories and how it has been implemented in this book, first, Sigmund Freud, the very first notion of Sigmund Freud that I could see in this book is castration, loss of phallocentric power. And now, Freud claims that the worst nightmare or the worst terror of any man is being castrated, losing the phallus, and which would immediately bring down the status of the man to a woman, and woman is the other. Woman is a second sex, and woman is the one who will be submissive, and the man is the one who will be dominant. And so this castration is always a nightmare to the men. And this is exactly what it takes place in The Passion of New Eve. So Angela Carter is kind of witty in exploring this aspect, and also injecting this into their plot, because Evelyn goes through the castration and becomes Eve. You see how it transforms the life of the individual. So Angela Carter tries to show that if Evelyn is castrated and molded into Eve, Eve is not a human being that is lesser than Evelyn. In fact, Eve goes through so much experience that Evelyn would not have gone. And Eve goes through so much process of learning and a process of seeing from different perspectives and getting this enlightenment that Evelyn would not have been able to get. So Eve's experience and Eve's body and Eve's psyche is built on this amazing transformation of learning, and this is something that is not in any way less than a man. Eve, the new Eve, is actually maybe in a thought of how the book unravels. The new Eve is somebody who is even higher than the status of what Evelyn was. And this castration, this loss of phallocentric power, this idea that being a woman is being lesser and being this emotionally mess person who does not have reasoning and everything, you just can't see that that is not true. New Eve is much more enlightened, and this is just Angela Carter trying to show that how psychoanalysis of Sigmund Freud is very male-centric. It does not have space for the women. It is focused on man and focused on erasing the status of man to even a higher degree. And she subverts this notion in this book. Next, Carl Jung. And his concept of logos and reason being connected to male, and eros and feelings being connected to female is again subverted. because it's not true that males are all about logic and reasoning, and they have this power to think, they have this power to make a change, they are more innovative. This is just a construction that people are made to think. And connecting a woman to eros and feelings, that is being much more emotional, being sentimental, going through these suffering, misery, and being sorrowful, and being this damsel in distress. All these images constructed in the society, that's also just came from the society. And now, in The Passion of New Eve, how we can see this is subverted is that female characters in this book are layered. So let's talk about Layla. In the beginning, Layla is a typical woman. She's just like what a patriarchal society would think about in a woman. And she goes through a transformation as well. Later end of the book, she is a military leader, and she has finally taken up her cause, and she's much more aware of her self and her power to be an agent, and her power to change your life. And in the same way, if we look at the mother, the fertility goddess, she has the knowledge, she has the reasoning, and the reason why she's transforming men like Evelyn, who are misogynistic, into female is because she wants them to experience, to see for themselves, to have this first-hand experience, which is much more stronger than just being an observer. So that and Tristessa also going through a awakening in the end of the book. And so the book tries to differentiate between the thought of the society and the thought of the new age, where in a postmodern world, everything that you've accumulated, all these traditional concepts, are all demystified, they're just subverted. Fluidity of sexual identity. When Angela Carter wrote this book in 1977, that was a time when a lot of things were happening. A lot of this postmodernism and concepts and post-colonial narratives, travel narratives, a lot of this intertextual text came out, and these concepts and ideas and discourses, everything was intertextual. And moving forward to this present context, we see now more than ever that identity is fluid. It is always shaped, it is always constructed, and is deconstructed, and is reconstructed, and we get new learnings in our life, and every day, every moment, we are changing. We're not the same as before, and tomorrow we won't be the same, and in the future we'll be a whole new person. And our psychology, our power to think, our power to comprehend things, understand things, changes as we go on, because we interact with so many things out there, and we have this internet where we can just blur the line between genders, where anything is possible. It doesn't have to be, it's not a space where you categorize male and female. You can just act as you please. You can be whoever you want to be, and you have this access to whatever you want in the world. All this knowledge is out there and nobody is restricted from it. And now more than ever, we're coming into this social consciousness where we realize that there are so many variations of experiences. There are so many variations of sexual identity itself, and everybody's coming out and they're exploring. They're also in an awakened state where they realize that they don't fit into any categories. And then there's always people who don't want to label themselves, and it's a time now that we can fully express who we are, and we don't have to box ourselves into traditional notions of genders and myths and everything out there. So the next thing is the assumption of pre-civilization natural forms of social existence, and that when the Englishmen, the British, conquered America, a pristine virginal land where the natives lived. And the natives, interestingly, had three types of genders at that time. So they had a male, they had female, and they had two-spirit. And two-spirit meant a person with an androgynous quality, where male and female both were present in the true spirit. But as this British invaded there, and they had the mythical knowledge of Bible, and they wanted to again establish a colony where such sinful homosexual identity were not allowed, and they just saw this new America, this new land, as a place where they can have a perfect utopian notions where everything's going well, morals and virtues and everything establishing that way. And so in that course, in trying to encroach upon this natural forms of social existence that was already there, there's a lot of history and a lot of facts were just lost during this time. And it's the allegorical element in Passion of New Eve. Evelyn, a British man, travels to America, New York, and his this also embodies how the British traveled to America for colonizing them. And Evelyn is an outsider in America, and he's also a god that feelings of superiority and feelings of mistrust, and seeing all this going on, this dystopian city that he lives in New York, he's confused, but he is an outsider, and he's trying to make an identity out of himself. He's trying to influence others. And so metamorphosis from subject to object of desire. This satirically Evelyn's transformation into Eve, from being a subject to becoming an object of desire in himself, is reflected in the book. So sometimes he looks at himself in the mirror and he sees Eve, and there's a female body, there's a female figure, but in his head he's still Evelyn, and he can also have this male's gaze, and he's looking at his own body, and he sees that this is the perfect type of body that I would have wanted. And it's very ironical to think about that. So sexual identity is always in a flux, and nobody can say that it does not transform as time goes on, and people learn and get a lot of knowledge on this. These two are my favorite quotes from the book. First, I know who we are Tiresias, page 146. It's So this word, this name Tiresias, reminds me of the Greek play by Sophocles, Oedipus. And there is a man, a blind prophet named Tiresias, and he knows the past, the present, and the future. He can see all at once, but is blind, and he has lived his experience as a man and a woman both. So he has so much knowledge in his head that he can look through various perspectives. He can get different angles on whatever he's dealing with. And here, Tristessa and Eve, they feel that they are Tiresias. And this tells a lot. This tells that they're both experience of the life before and the life after the transformation is a kind of awakening on their behalf, and they are able to see much more clear ahead. The next quote: masculine and feminine are co-relatives which involve one another. I am sure of that. But what the nature of masculine and the nature of feminine might be, whether they involve male and female, that I do not know. Though I have been both a man and woman, still I do not know the answer to these questions. So this is a quote spoken by Eve. And Eve says that what it means to be masculine and what it means to be feminine, to have the differentiated nature, that is something he does not feel that is connected with being male and female at all. Masculinity in a male and femininity in a female being distinct is not something that he has learned, even though being both a male and a female, having both sides of the experience. So this is kind of a point in the book where you really try to see what Angela Carter is trying to tell us. That is, these are not related at all. There can be male and female, and they can have their own sorts of activities that they do, their own sorts of roles they play, and nothing is going to determine whether it should be connected to the biological sex itself. Thank you for watching the video. If you have any questions about the Passion of New Eve, I would love to answer them in the comment section. Please stick around and like and subscribe to this channel, because I will be back with a lot of academic analysis, interpretations that can help you out. Stay tuned.